I was a pregnant high school graduate at 18 when my parents disowned me and kicked me out into the freezing snow. 15 years later, they are violently pounding on my car window, begging to meet the grandson they threw away. What they did not know was that this sudden desire for a family reunion was about to cost them absolutely everything they own. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your toxic family abandoned you. The sudden sound of a heavy fist slamming against the tinted glass of my Range Rover shattered the quiet Sunday morning. I did not flinch. I slowly lowered the window, letting the crisp Atlanta air slip into the heated leather interior of my car. Standing on the other side of the glass, looking frantic and entirely out of place, was my mother Vivian and my older sister Chloe. It had been 15 long years since I last saw their faces. 15 years since my father, Pastor Marcus, tossed my cheap suitcase onto the icy pavement and told me my teenage pregnancy was a disgusting stain on his pristine church reputation. Now here they were standing on the private road leading up to my fortified estate. Vivian shoved her face toward the open window. Her eyes darted around frantically before locking onto mine. "Maya, get out of this car right now," she demanded, her voice trembling with fake authority and panic. 15 years is long enough to hold a grudge. You need to stop hiding from your own blood. We are here for a family reunion, and we are not leaving until you bring our grandson out here to see us. I stared at her. The audacity was almost poetic. For over a decade I was dead to them. My son Julian did not exist to them. Yet today they were demanding access to him like he was a piece of misplaced property. I did not say a word. I just let the heavy silence hang in the air, forcing them to sit in their awkward desperation. That is when Brad stepped forward. Brad was her husband. He was a white commercial real estate developer who always walked into a room like he owned the floorboards beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. He pushed his way past Vivian and leaned down, resting his forearm against the roof of my car. He looked past me, staring at the massive wrought iron security gates that blocked the entrance to my driveway. The gates were towering black steel, securing the multi-million-dollar property that lay beyond them. "Listen here, Maya," Brad said, sighing heavily like he was talking to a stubborn child. "We do not have all day to play games with you. Go ahead and call your boss. Tell the owner of the estate to open these gates. We have some serious family business to discuss with the boy, and this is grown adult business. We need to get inside now." A sharp laugh almost escaped my throat, but I swallowed it down. Brad actually thought I was the hired help. He looked at my luxury car and assumed I was a housekeeper or a nanny driving the boss vehicle to run errands. In his narrow, privileged mind, there was absolutely no way the pregnant teenager his toxic family threw out on the street could possibly own the sprawling property sitting behind those iron gates. He assumed Julian was just the son of the maid living in the guest quarters. Brad tapped his expensive watch, emphasizing his impatience. "Come on," he snapped. "Chop chop. We know Julian just turned 15. We know he is living here with you. Just buzz the house and tell whoever you work for that the family is here to collect the boy. This involves legal matters regarding his grandfather, so do not make this harder than it has to be." I looked at Chloe, who was standing behind her husband with her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing a black designer dress that looked slightly faded. I noticed the scuff marks on her heels. The golden child was not shining so brightly anymore. Her eyes were full of the same toxic jealousy she harbored since we were little girls, but now there was a tight layer of deep panic underneath it. They were trying to act powerful, but they reeked of sheer desperation. I shifted my gaze back to Brad. I did not reach for my phone. I did not call a boss. I reached up and pressed the button. The massive iron gate slowly swung open. I smiled at him coldly. The heavy steel gates groaned as they parted. Brad took a step back. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. He looked at the gates, then back at me, waiting for me to pull the car aside so his family could drive in behind me. I did not move. I stared past him, my eyes landing on the man standing by the bumper of their dented sedan. It was my father. Pastor Marcus stood there in his Sunday best, wearing a tailored black suit with a stiff white collar. He had his hands clasped in front of him, trying to look dignified, like a righteous man of God gracing my presence. Seeing him standing there triggered a visceral memory. The biting cold of a December night rushed back to me. 15 years ago, he wore that exact same expression of pious judgment as he hurled my duffel bag into the snowbank. I can still hear his booming voice, echoing off the neighboring houses. He screamed that a pregnant teenager was a rotting disease on his household. He yelled that my sin would ruin his standing at the church and that I was dead to him. While I shivered in the snow begging for mercy, my sister Chloe had stood on the warm front porch, wrapping her expensive wool coat tight around her shoulders and smirking. She did not say a word to defend me. She just watched me freeze. I blinked away the cold memory. The present was much warmer. I looked Brad dead in his pale eyes. "I do not work for anyone, Brad." I said, my voice low and dangerously steady. "I do not have a boss. I own this estate. I own the gates you are standing in front of. Now move your cheap shoes off my pavement before I have my security team escort you off the premises." Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face turned a patchy shade of red. Vivian gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. I rolled my window up, cutting off whatever pathetic excuse Brad was trying to formulate. I drove through the gates, leaving them standing in the dust. I knew they would follow. Greed is a powerful motivator. I parked my car in the expansive circular driveway right next to my custom fountain. A few moments later, their sputtering sedan crept up the long paved road and parked awkwardly behind me. They stepped out of their car, looking like tourists who had taken a wrong turn into a billionaire compound. The sheer scale of my property was suffocating them. We walked toward the massive double doors of my foyer. My security guard opened the door for me. He nodded respectfully as I passed. I instructed him to let my guests inside, but to keep a close eye on them. The moment they stepped into the grand foyer, the dynamic shifted entirely. The pristine marble floors reflected the light from the massive crystal chandelier hanging above us. Chloe immediately began inspecting the space. Her eyes darted wildly across the custom artwork on the walls and the sweeping mahogany staircase. She could not handle it. Her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure jealousy. She crossed her arms tightly, digging her fingernails into her sleeves. "You must have found yourself a very rich sugar daddy, Maya," she sneered. Her voice was loud and bitter, echoing off the marble walls. "You are doing the exact same thing you did when you were 18, using your body to get what you want. I see some things never change." I simply handed my coat to my assistant and turned to face her. "The difference between us, Chloe, is that I do not need a man to buy my real estate," I replied calmly. "My name is the only one on the deed." Brad quickly stepped between us, trying to regain control of the narrative. He cleared his throat violently and adjusted his cheap tie. He abandoned his previous arrogance and desperately tried to put on his serious businessman persona. "Okay, let us stop the petty bickering," he commanded, attempting to sound authoritative. "We did not come here to admire the architecture or discuss your dating life. We came here to see Julian. Call the boy down right now. We have important legal matters to handle." I looked him up and down, taking in his frayed cuffs and nervous sweat. "No," I said flatly. "My son is studying. You will not disrupt his peace. If you have something to say, you will say it to me." Vivian rushed forward, throwing her hands wildly up into the air. "Oh, Maya, please," she cried out loudly, putting on a truly terrible theatrical performance for us all. "I have prayed for you every single night for 15 years. Vivian sobbed, pressing a dry tissue against her completely tearless eyes. Not a day went by that I did not think about my beautiful daughter out there in the world all alone. The Lord knows my heart has been broken. We are family, Maya. Family fights, but family also forgives. It is time to let go of the past. It is time to heal. I just want to hold my precious grandson in my arms. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the grand foyer like foul air. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails, her expensive styled hair, and the designer handbag dangling from her wrist. She looked exactly the same as she did the night she stood by and watched my father throw me out into a freezing blizzard. There was not a single ounce of genuine maternal affection in her body. "If you prayed for me every single night for 15 years, Vivian," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill, "why did you never send a single pair of socks for the grandson you claim to miss so much?" Vivian froze. The fake sobbing stopped instantly. She lowered the tissue and stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open. "Do not stand in my house and talk to me about healing." I continued, taking a slow step toward her. "Do not use your religion to whitewash your cruelty. You did not look for me when I was homeless. You did not look for me when I was giving birth in a charity ward. You did not care if Julian or I starved to death on the street. So let us drop the loving grandmother routine right now, because you are embarrassing yourself." The foyer went dead silent. Chloe shifted uncomfortably on her scuffed heels, refusing to make eye contact. Brad aggressively rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly very interested in the marble floor patterns. Pastor Marcus puffed out his chest, preparing to launch into one of his booming righteous sermons to defend his wife, but I cut him off before he could even draw a breath. I crossed my arms and looked at the four of them very closely. I took in the dark, heavy fabrics they were wearing. Marcus was in a solid black suit with a black tie. Vivian wore a black high-neck dress. Chloe was in a faded black designer dress, and Brad had a black armband pinned to his charcoal blazer. They looked like a flock of well-dressed vultures. "Why are you all dressed in mourning clothes?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "You did not dress like this for a Sunday brunch or a happy family reunion. Who died?" The question landed like a physical blow. The four of them exchanged panicked glances. They had not planned for me to be this observant. They expected the scared, vulnerable 18-year-old girl they had bullied out of their lives, not a grown woman who could read their body language like a balance sheet. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. He straightened his posture, trying to summon the commanding presence he used to terrorize his congregation. He looked down his nose at me, a habit he simply could not break. "Show some respect when you speak to your mother, Maya," he bellowed, his voice echoing harshly in the large space. "We did not come here to be interrogated by you. We came here because family business requires it. And to answer your question, your grandfather passed away 3 weeks ago." "Big Daddy is dead," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could catch them. A sudden sharp ache pierced my chest. Big Daddy was the only person in that house who ever showed me an ounce of kindness. He used to sneak me $20 bills when Marcus was not looking and told me I was smart enough to conquer the world. He was the only reason my childhood was not a complete nightmare, and he had been dead for 3 weeks. "You did not invite me to the funeral," I stated, stating a fact rather than asking a question. "We wanted to keep the service dignified," Marcus replied without a shred of remorse. "Your lifestyle choices and your history with this family would have been a distraction for the congregation. We buried him with the respect he deserved. But now there are legal matters that must be attended to. Matters concerning the boy." I took a deep breath, forcing the grief down into a locked box inside my mind. I could mourn my grandfather later. Right now I was surrounded by predators, and I needed to stay sharp. I looked at Brad, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "You did not come here to mourn," I said, my voice returning to its icy baseline. "You came here because you hit a legal wall after the funeral. What do you want?" Brad stepped forward, completely dropping the grieving family member charade. He unbuttoned his charcoal blazer and crossed his arms, trying to look authoritative. "Your grandfather was a very secretive man, Maya." He began, his tone dripping with condescension. "We all knew he had money, but we did not know the extent of his portfolio. When the lawyers read the will, We discovered he established a generational wealth trust fund decades ago. It is currently valued at over $15 million. I kept my face completely blank. $15 million was a staggering amount, but I did not let them see a single flicker of surprise. I simply stared at Brad, waiting for the punchline. I knew my grandfather better than any of them, and I knew there had to be an ironclad condition attached to that kind of money. There is a stipulation. Brad continued, his jaw clenching tightly. The old man was incredibly traditional. Some might even say archaic. The trust was designed to preserve the family name and bloodline. The primary bulk of that $15 million fund does not unlock for just anyone. It only activates for a direct male heir of his bloodline upon reaching his 15th birthday. The pieces instantly clicked together in my mind. Julian, my son, had just celebrated his 15th birthday 2 weeks ago. My grandfather had meticulously timed this. He knew exactly what he was doing. Chloe let out a sharp, frustrated breath. She could no longer contain the bitter jealousy bubbling inside her. I did everything right, she snapped, her voice trembling with raw anger. I married a good man. I built a respectable household. I gave Mom and Dad grandchildren. But the lawyers said my girls do not count. 3 daughters, Maya. I have 3 daughters, and none of them qualify for the primary trust because they are not male heirs. It is entirely unfair. I am the eldest. I stayed. I followed the rules. I looked at my older sister and let a slow, mocking smile spread across my face. So, let me get this straight, Chloe, I said, my voice laced with pure amusement. You played the role of the perfect golden child your entire life. You married the great white hope of real estate to elevate your social standing. You did everything Mom and Dad demanded, but you failed to produce the one thing that could secure the bag. You failed to give them a male heir. And now the teenage disappointment you all threw out in the snow happens to be the mother of the sole heir to a $15 million fortune. The irony is absolutely delicious. Chloe turned an ugly shade of red and lunged forward, but Vivian grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Marcus slammed his walking cane against the marble floor to demand order. That is enough, Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. We did not come here to discuss fairness. We came here to do what is right for the legacy of this family. You are a single mother, Maya. You have no husband to guide you. You have no formal education in wealth management or corporate finance. $15 million is not play money. It requires a heavy hand and a sharp mind to protect it from taxes and bad investments. I raised an eyebrow. And I suppose you have a solution for my tragic lack of a husband, I asked dryly. Yes, we do, Marcus declared, confidently puffing out his chest. You are going to sign a legal guardianship transfer. You will sign over the financial management rights of Julian to Brad. Brad is a successful commercial developer. He understands markets and investments. He will integrate the trust fund into his corporate portfolio and manage it for the good of the entire family. It is your duty to sign the paperwork, Maya. You owe this family for the shame you brought upon us 15 years ago. This is your chance to finally make things right and secure our legacy. I stared at Marcus. I could not believe the sheer delusion standing in my foyer. You want me to hand over my son trust fund to a man who is sweating through his cheap cologne, I asked, pointing directly at Brad. Look at him, Marcus. At him. Look at the frayed cuffs on his shirt. Look at the way his hands are shaking. This is not about family legacy. This is about a bailout. Brad flinched, stepping back as if I had physically struck him. His confident facade began to crack, showing the absolute terror hiding underneath. You do not know what you are talking about, he stammered defensively. My company is perfectly fine. I am offering to help you manage a fortune you cannot possibly comprehend, Maya. I let out a harsh laugh that echoed sharply in the massive foyer. I comprehend numbers perfectly well, Brad, I told him, taking another step forward until I was standing just inches away from him. I can smell the desperation on you. You are leveraged to the hilt. Your commercial properties are sitting empty. The banks are breathing down your neck. You do not want to manage the wealth of my son. You want to cannibalize it to save your own sinking ship. His face morphed from defensive embarrassment into pure vicious anger. The polite businessman mask melted away completely, revealing the entitled, arrogant man underneath. He reached into his leather briefcase and yanked out a thick stack of legal documents, slamming them down onto the surface of my entryway console table. "Fine," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You want to do it the hard way, Maya. We can do it the hard way." I tried to be generous. I tried to handle this internally like a civilized family. But if you are going to be an ungrateful, stubborn woman, then we will just take the boy and the money through the courts. I glanced down at the documents. The bold lettering at the top of the first page read, "Petition for Grandparent Visitation and Custody." I looked back up at Brad, slowly raising an eyebrow in complete silence. "You are suing me for custody of a child you have never even met?" I asked, my tone dangerously calm. "We are not suing you," Brad sneered, puffing his chest out again. "Marcus and Vivian are suing you. I am simply funding their legal team, and let me assure you, Maya, my lawyers are the best in Atlanta. They do not lose. These documents establish a formal petition for grandparents' rights. The state of Georgia takes the welfare of minors very seriously, especially when a massive inheritance is involved." Chloe stepped up next to her husband, her confidence suddenly returning now that the legal threats were on the table. "You should really just sign the financial transfer, Maya," she said, her voice oozing with fake sympathy. "You cannot win this. Think about how this will look in front of a judge. You are a single mother with a history of teenage rebellion and moral failure. Mom and Dad are respected pillars of the community. Dad is a beloved pastor with a congregation of thousands. Who do you think a judge is going to side with?" Brad smirked, leaning heavily into his unearned racial and social privilege. He crossed his arms and looked at me as if I was dirt beneath his shoes. "She is right, Maya," he added, his tone condescending and cruel. "Let us look at the facts. I am a prominent white developer with deep ties to the local government and the judiciary. Your father is a religious leader, and you are just a bitter, estranged woman who got pregnant in high school. The court will look at this situation and instantly determine that Julian is better off under the legal guardianship of his stable, wealthy grandparents and his successful uncle. They will strip your parental rights so fast it will make your head spin." Vivian chimed in, wiping her perfectly dry eyes once more. "We do not want to take him away from you, Maya," she lied smoothly. "We just want to protect his future. If you sign the financial management rights over to Brad right now, we will drop the custody lawsuit. You can keep your son. We just take control of the trust fund. That is a very fair compromise." The sheer evil of their plan hung heavily in the air. They had coordinated this entire ambush. They researched the trust fund, they hired high-powered lawyers, and they orchestrated this visit to corner me in my own home. They fully intended to use the legal system to terrorize me into handing over $15 million. They were banking on the assumption that I was still the terrified, powerless 18-year-old girl they discarded in the snow. They thought they could use their social status, their race, and their religious standing to crush me. They formed a tight physical circle around me in my own foyer, throwing insults and demands like weapons. Marcus boomed about the wrath of God and my duty to honor my family. Vivian whined endlessly about a grandmother with a broken heart. Chloe spat bitter venom about my supposed incompetence as a mother. Brad repeatedly tapped the legal documents, threatening me with total financial ruin. It was exactly like the freezing winter night they threw me out. They wanted me to scream and cry and beg for mercy. Instead, I just stood perfectly still and smiled a terrifying smile. The silence stretched through the grand foyer, stretching so tight it felt like it might snap and break the marble floor. My terrifying smile only widened as I watched their faces fall. They had thrown their best weapons at me. The guilt trips, the religious manipulation, the legal threats, and the sheer weight of their collective entitlement. They expected the walls to close in on me. They expected me to drop to my knees and sign my son away to save myself from their wrath. But they were fighting a ghost from 15 years ago. I did not argue the law with Brad. I did not debate theology with my father. I did not match the hysterical pitch of my mother or sister. Instead, I calmly reached into the pocket of my tailored trousers and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face, casting a cool glow against the warm light of the chandelier. I opened my messages and typed a single short text. "Come down," I wrote. The clowns are performing." I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket, sliding my hands smoothly to my sides as I waited. Brad let out a heavy, frustrated breath. He tapped his index finger aggressively against the stack of custody documents on the console table. "Are you even listening to me, Maya?" He snapped, his face flushing with renewed anger. "This is not a joke. These are official legal petitions. If you do not sign the financial transfer right now, I will have my lawyers file this custody suit first thing tomorrow morning. You will lose everything: your son, your dignity, and your future. Do not test me." Marcus slammed his cane against the floor again. "Stop smiling, girl," he thundered, his pastoral voice booming through the house. "The Lord punishes the wicked and the proud. You are acting like a foolish child. We are offering you a lifeline. Take the pen and sign the papers before we are forced to take drastic measures to protect the boy." I just kept smiling. My eyes flicked past them toward the sweeping mahogany staircase that curved down into the foyer. I could hear it before they did. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps descending the stairs. The four of them froze. Their heads whipped around, following my gaze. Julian stepped into view. He was 15 years old, but he carried himself with the heavy, commanding presence of a man twice his age. He was not wearing sweatpants or a hoodie like a typical teenager. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt. He paused on the middle landing, resting one hand casually on the polished wooden railing. He looked down at the four strangers standing in our foyer. His eyes, the exact same cold, analytical eyes as mine, swept over their faces, taking in their black mourning clothes and their desperate expressions. For a moment, the family was completely stunned into silence. They had come here expecting to find a lost, vulnerable, fatherless boy they could easily manipulate and control. Instead, they were looking at a young man who radiated wealth, power, and complete indifference. Vivian was the first to break the silence. She let out a dramatic gasp, pressing both hands to her chest. "Oh my goodness," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Julian, my sweet, beautiful grandson, look at how big you have grown. Come here, baby. Come give your grandmother a hug." She took a step toward the bottom of the stairs, opening her arms wide. Julian did not move. He did not smile. He just stared at her with a blank expression that made Vivian falter and lower her arms awkwardly. Marcus tried a different approach. He puffed out his chest and put on a warm, booming smile. "Well, look at the young man of the house," he said heartily. "It is a blessing to finally meet you, Julian. I am your grandfather, Pastor Marcus. We have come a long way to see you, son. We have some very important family business to discuss regarding your future." Julian slowly descended the rest of the stairs, his leather dress shoes clicking softly against the marble. He walked past Vivian, entirely ignoring her outstretched hand. He stopped a few feet away from Marcus and Brad, slipping his hands into his suit pockets. He tilted his head slightly, studying them like they were an interesting exhibit in a museum. "You must be the family my mother warned me about," Julian said, his voice deep and perfectly calm. I watched the color drain rapidly from Chloe and Vivian as my son firmly established his total dominance over their pathetic charade. The real game had just begun in our beautiful foyer. The real game had just begun in our beautiful foyer. Chloe could no longer contain the toxic cocktail of jealousy and rage boiling inside her. Seeing my son standing there looking like a young billionaire completely shattered her carefully constructed facade. She looked at Julian and then looked at her own scuffed designer shoes. The injustice of it all in her twisted mind was simply too much to bear. She let out a shrill, bitter laugh that echoed harshly against the marble walls. "I did everything right," Chloe screamed, stepping forward and pointing an accusing finger at me. "I was the good daughter. I went to the expensive private college Mom and Dad paid for. I saved myself for marriage. I married a respectable man who was supposed to provide me with a life of luxury. I gave this family beautiful grandchildren. I did every single thing you two hypocrites ever asked of me." She whipped her head around to glare at our parents. Her face was flushed and her neck was covered in angry red splotches. "And what do I get for being the perfect golden child?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Nothing. The lawyers told us the trust fund explicitly excludes female descendants. My 3 beautiful girls get absolutely nothing because they are not male heirs. And this teenager," she gestured wildly toward Julian, who remained completely unfazed, "gets $15 million just for being born. It is completely sick." Brad reached out and grabbed Chloe by the arm, trying to pull her back. "Keep your voice down, Chloe," he hissed, his face pale with embarrassment. "We are trying to negotiate a legal arrangement here. You are ruining the strategy." Chloe violently yanked her arm out of his grasp. "Do not tell me to keep my voice down, Brad," she shrieked, turning her fury onto her own husband. "You promised me a life of extreme wealth. You promised me we would be the ultimate power couple in Atlanta. But your commercial properties are sitting empty, and the bank is calling my personal cell phone looking for mortgage payments. I am wearing a dress from 3 seasons ago because my credit cards are maxed out. I am drowning in your debt, and the only way out is that money." She pointed at Julian again, panting heavily as the ugly truth spilled out onto the pristine floor. I watched her melt down with absolute icy satisfaction. This was the sister who mocked me. This was the sister who stood on the porch in her warm wool coat and smiled while I was thrown out into the snow to freeze. Now she was the one standing in the cold, begging for a lifeline. "So let me get this straight, Chloe," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm, slicing through her hysterics like a surgical blade. "You played the role of the perfect, compliant daughter your entire life. You allowed mom and dad to parade you around the church as their ultimate success story. You married the great white hope of real estate to elevate your social standing. You sacrificed your own independence to be a trophy wife for a man who is currently sweating through his cheap cologne. You did absolutely everything the family demanded of you to preserve their perfect image. But you failed to produce the one thing that could actually secure the bag. You failed to give them a male heir." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, tilting my head as I mocked her completely. "And now the teenage disappointment you all threw out like trash happens to be the mother of the sole heir to a massive fortune. You traded your soul for status, Chloe. And you do not even have the status to show for it anymore. The irony is absolutely delicious." Chloe lunged forward, her hands curled into fists, but Julian casually stepped in front of me. He did not raise his voice or lift a hand. He simply looked down at her with a chilling emptiness that stopped her dead in her tracks. "If you take one more step toward my mother, I will have security physically remove you from our property," Julian stated flatly. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Chloe stumbled backward, her chest heaving as Vivian rushed forward to wrap her arms around her. Vivian pulled her favorite daughter back, sobbing loudly about how cruel I had become. But the truth was out in the open now. The golden child was a complete and utter failure. She had followed the rules of a toxic system, and the system had completely bankrupted her. I looked at Marcus, who was gripping his heavy cane tightly. "Your perfect daughter is a massive liability," I said to him very coldly. Marcus slammed his heavy wooden cane against the floor again, trying to shatter the tension I had just built. "Do not speak about your sister that way," he barked, his voice rattling the crystal pendants on the chandelier. "Chloe is a respectable woman who has honored this family. You, on the other hand, have done nothing but bring shame to our name. And now you stand here dripping with arrogance just because your son happened to win a genetic lottery." I laughed, a short, dry sound that held absolutely no humor. "A genetic lottery," I repeated. "You mean the bloodline you tried to leave freezing in a snowbank 15 years ago? That genetic lottery?" Marcus ignored my question completely. He reached inside his tailored black suit jacket and produced a thick, folded document. He stepped forward, holding it out toward me like it was a holy commandment. "This is a legal transfer of financial guardianship," he declared, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You are going to sign this document today, Maya. You are going to sign over the management of Julian and his trust fund to Brad. I looked at the document, then up at my father. Are you completely out of your mind? I asked softly. Marcus puffed out his chest, standing as tall as he could. I am thinking clearly for the first time in weeks, he insisted. You are just a single mother, Maya. You have no husband to guide your decisions. You have no formal education in corporate finance or large-scale wealth management. $15 million is not a toy. It is an empire. And an empire requires a strong, capable man to run it. Brad is the only successful businessman in this family. He knows how to navigate the corporate world. He will take this money and integrate it into his commercial real estate portfolio to protect our family legacy. I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his words sink in. Family legacy, I echoed, rolling the words around in my mouth like a bitter poison. What exactly is this family legacy you are so desperate to protect, Marcus? Is it the legacy of throwing a pregnant teenager onto the street to protect your church attendance numbers? Is it the legacy of raising a golden child who treats everyone around her like garbage? Or is it the legacy of a white son-in-law who managed to bankrupt his company despite having every single advantage in the world? Vivian stepped up beside her husband, her face twisted in an ugly scowl. How dare you speak to your father about legacy, she hissed. We built a respectable name in this community. We built a church from the ground up. Your father is a pillar of society. This money belongs to the family. It belongs to the church. It is your duty before God to secure our future. If Brad Company goes under, the scandal will destroy your father's reputation. You are going to cause another catastrophe for this family, just like you did when you were 18. I shook my head slowly, amazed by their relentless delusion. You really do not hear yourselves, do you? I asked. You talk about family and legacy, but all you really care about is what you can extract from people. When I was pregnant, I was a liability, so you threw me away. Now my son is a multi-million-dollar asset, so suddenly you want to play grandparents. You want to take his inheritance, the money my grandfather specifically left for him, and give it to the man who married your favorite daughter just to save face at your country club. That is not what this is, Brad interjected, trying to sound reasonable again. Maya, this is about preserving capital. If you let a 15-year-old boy and a single mother control this much liquid cash, it will be gone in 5 years. You will buy sports cars and bad investments. I have the infrastructure to grow this trust fund. I will make Julian a very rich man when he comes of age. But right now, the family needs capital to weather a temporary market downturn. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Julian let out a quiet scoff from beside me. A temporary market downturn? Julian repeated, his voice dripping with teenage sarcasm combined with adult intelligence. Is that what you call a string of defaulted commercial mortgages, Brad? Because your portfolio is a toxic wasteland of terrible decisions. Marcus slammed his cane down again, his face turning purple with rage. You will sign the paper, Maya, he commanded, pointing at my face. You owe us for all of the pain you have caused us. You will give us exactly what we deserve. I looked at the finger pointing in my face, and then I shifted my gaze back to Brad. I did not care about my father and his empty commands. I only cared about the pathetic man hiding behind my family, using them as a shield for his own incompetence. I took a slow step toward Brad, forcing him to hold my eye contact. What exactly do we deserve, Brad? I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are the one who is desperate for a handout. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously. He tried to stand taller, but his posture was rigid and defensive. I am offering you professional wealth management, Maya. He repeated, his voice lacking its previous absolute certainty. You are too emotional to see the logical business strategy here. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Logical business strategy, I repeated. Let us talk about your strategy, Brad. Let us talk about the image you are trying so desperately to project right now. I reached out and casually flipped the lapel of his charcoal blazer. He jerked away, but I had already seen enough. You are wearing an off-the-rack suit, Brad. You used to brag about your custom Italian tailoring, but this fabric is cheap and stiff. I looked down at his wrists. And your shirt cuffs are completely frayed. A successful commercial real estate developer does not show up to a multi-million-dollar negotiation wearing a shirt that belongs in the trash. Brad quickly shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to hide the frayed edges from view. You are being ridiculous, he stammered, a thick bead of sweat rolling down his red face. I threw this on this morning because we were in a rush to see the boy. We have important matters to handle and I did not have time to dress up for a casual meeting. I shook my head slowly, stepping even closer until I was entirely in his personal space. I inhaled sharply, and the cologne I added wrinkling my nose in disgust. You always bathed yourself in Tom Ford. It was your signature scent. You wore it to every holiday dinner to remind everyone how much money you made. But today you smell like a cheap drugstore body spray. You are sweating through it, Brad. I can smell your fear and your desperation. Vivian gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. Stop attacking him, Maya, she cried out, her voice shaking with fake outrage. He is your family. He is trying to help you secure a future for your child. He is trying to help himself, I snapped, cutting her off completely. I turned back to Brad. My eyes narrowed into a cold glare. The banks have completely cut you off, have they not, Brad? Your commercial properties are sitting completely empty because you over-leveraged yourself in a dying market. You took out massive loans to build luxury retail spaces, and absolutely no one is renting them. The interest rates are eating you alive, and you cannot make the monthly payments. You do not want to manage Julian Trust Fund to protect our family legacy. You want to drain his $15 million to pay off your toxic loans and save yourself from total bankruptcy. That is a complete lie, Brad shouted, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. My company is simply restructuring. We have temporary cash flow issues, but our core assets are completely solid. You are just a bitter woman making wild, uneducated accusations about things you do not understand. Julian stepped forward again, standing right beside me to confront the lying man. If your assets are so solid, Brad, then why is your corporate headquarters currently listed for public auction? Julian asked, his tone perfectly flat and devastatingly sharp. I looked it up on the county registrar website this morning. You missed 3 consecutive property tax payments. They are foreclosing on your main office building next week. The entire foyer went dead silent. Marcus looked at Brad, his eyes wide with complete shock. Vivian covered her mouth with her trembling hand. They knew Brad was struggling, but they clearly did not know the full devastating extent of his financial ruin. Brad opened his mouth to deny it, but Chloe finally broke. She let out a loud, agonizing scream that tore through the quiet house. "Stop it!" she shrieked, covering her ears with her hands. "Just stop it, all of you! It is all true! Everything they are saying is true!" "Chloe, what are you doing?" Brad hissed, grabbing her arm. "Shut your mouth right now." "We are entirely bankrupt!" she cried loudly, shaking him off. Brad's face contorted into something genuinely ugly. The polished businessman veneer shattered completely, leaving behind a cornered, vicious man who realized his back was against the wall. He grabbed Chloe by both shoulders and shoved her hard behind him, physically removing her from the conversation. "Shut up," he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous guttural register. "Just shut up and let me handle this before you ruin everything we planned." He turned back to face me, and the air in the foyer suddenly felt incredibly heavy. He was no longer trying to sell me on his financial expertise. He was no longer pretending this was a mutually beneficial family arrangement. He was shifting to the only weapon he had left, which was brute force and systemic privilege. He walked back over to the console table where he had previously slammed down the stack of legal documents. He picked up the heavy petition for custody and held it up, pointing a stiff, aggressive finger at the bold lettering. "Fine." Brad spat, his chest heaving as he glared at me. "You want to air out dirty laundry and play the smart girl. You think because you live in a big house you are somehow untouchable. You think you can talk down to me." He took a step toward me, his height and build designed to physically intimidate. Let me explain exactly how the real world works, Maya. You might have a nice house and a little bit of money, but you are still just a black single mother in the state of Georgia. Do you understand what that means in a courtroom? I did not blink. I just watched him dig his own grave. It means you are entirely vulnerable. Brad continued, leaning heavily into his unearned confidence. It means when I walk into a courtroom with my high-powered attorneys, the judge is going to look at me and see a respected white developer. They are going to look at your father and see a pillar of the religious community. They are going to look at Vivian and see a devoted grandmother. And then they are going to look at you. He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively in my direction. They will see a woman who got pregnant at 18. A woman who alienated her own family. A woman raising a teenage boy without a proper father figure. I do not care how much money you think you have, Maya. The justice system is built to protect people like me, not people like you. I play golf with the judges in this county. I fund their re-election campaigns. They listen to me. Vivian stepped out from behind her husband, her face hardened into a cold mask of determination. She was entirely on board with this racist threat. Listen to him, Maya, she warned, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. We do not want to destroy you, but we will do what is necessary to protect Julian's future. He needs the guidance of a strong traditional family. If you force us to go to trial, we will testify about your troubled past. We will tell the court exactly how rebellious and unstable you were. Marcus nodded gravely, gripping his wooden cane with both hands. It is the absolute truth, he boomed, his voice filled with righteous fury. We will tell the judge everything. We will paint a clear picture of an unfit mother who is withholding a child from his loving grandparents out of sheer spite. You will not survive a character assassination like that in a highly public courtroom. Your reputation will be completely ruined, and they will take the boy away from you anyway. Brad pulled an expensive silver pen from his inside jacket pocket and threw it deliberately onto the marble floor right at my feet. It clattered loudly, echoing sharply in the quiet space. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with absolute contempt. This is your ultimatum, Brad declared, his voice ringing with authority. You are going to pick up that pen and you are going to sign the financial transfer documents right now. If you sign over Julian's trust fund to my management, we tear up the petition. You get to keep your kid and we get the capital to save my business. It is a simple transaction, but if you refuse, I will make one phone call. My legal team will file this injunction by noon today. We will freeze all of your assets, lock up the trust fund in a lengthy probate, and drag you through a legal hell so deep you will be begging to give us the money just to make it stop. He stepped back, looking satisfied. Sign it, he commanded. I did not look at the pen on the floor. I kept my eyes locked on Brad, watching the smug satisfaction radiating from his face. Before I could respond, Chloe pushed her way past him, eager to twist the knife. Her previous embarrassment was gone, replaced by a venomous desperation to see me destroyed. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest, her eyes wide and manic. Listen to him, Maya. Chloe sneered, her voice shrill and grating. You do not stand a chance. Dad has a congregation of over 5,000 members. Every single one of them respects him. He is on the board of 3 different charities in this city. If this goes to trial, he will have hundreds of character witnesses lining up to tell the judge what a saint he is. And what do you have? Who is going to testify for you? We will tell the court exactly what kind of person you really are. She took a step closer, invading my space with her bitter energy. We will tell the judge how you rebelled against a loving Christian home, she continued, laying out their fabricated narrative. We will say you ran away because you could not handle the rules. We will bring up your teenage pregnancy and paint it as proof of your deep moral instability. We will tell them you have been keeping your son away from his loving grandparents out of pure vindictive spite because you are bitter about your own personal failures. Vivian nodded enthusiastically from the sidelines, chiming in to support her golden child. We will say you are mentally unfit, Vivian added, her voice cold and calculated. We will request a psychological evaluation. We will drag it out for months, Maya. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you before we even get to a verdict. Chloe smiled a twisted, triumphant smile. You see, Maya, the world does not care about your little feelings, she mocked. The legal system cares about optics. Look at this room. Look at Brad. He is a wealthy, successful white man with a team of corporate lawyers on retainer. Look at Dad. He is a respected religious leader in the Black community. And then there is you. A single mother who got kicked out of high school because she could not keep her legs closed. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? They are going to look at you and see a stereotype. They will strip your custody rights and hand Julian over to us before you can even mount a defense. The sheer malice in their coordinated attack was breathtaking. They had sat around a table and meticulously plotted how to weaponize my trauma, my race, and my gender against me. They were fully prepared to commit perjury, to destroy my reputation, and steal my child, simply to bail out a failed real estate developer. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought the threat of systemic bias would terrify me into submission. Marcus banged his cane again, demanding my attention. The choice is yours, Maya, he boomed, acting like a merciful god offering a pardon. Sign the transfer and let Brad manage the trust fund. Keep your son and live your life, or fight us and lose absolutely everything. You will be left with no money, no child, and no reputation. Do not be a stubborn fool. Pick up the pen. I slowly looked down at the silver pen gleaming against the pristine marble floor. Then I looked at my son. Julian was standing right beside me, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored suit. He had listened to their entire tirade. He had heard his grandparents and his aunt threaten to destroy his mother using lies and bigotry. A normal 15-year-old boy would be terrified or crying. But Julian just looked completely bored. He looked at them with a level of disgust, usually reserved for scraping something foul off the bottom of a shoe. I turned my attention back to my family, taking in their expectant faces. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for the trembling hands and the defeated sigh. They were waiting for the broken 18-year-old girl to surrender. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It started low in my chest and grew until it echoed brightly through the massive foyer. Brad frowned, his smug expression faltering. Chloe crossed her arms, looking deeply offended by my reaction. You really think you hold all the cards? I asked, my voice steady and light. You came into my house, threatened to steal my son, and boldly admitted you planned to commit perjury. You laid out a brilliant legal strategy built entirely on an illusion. An illusion? Brad scoffed, taking another aggressive step forward, closing the distance between us. There is no illusion here, Maya. These are legally binding documents prepared by the most expensive law firm in this state. He waved the thick stack of papers right in my face, the crisp white pages fluttering. You are completely delusional if you think you can fight this. Marcus moved to my left, blocking my path to the living room. Do not provoke us. Maya, he bellowed, his voice reaching that terrifying pitch he used to command his congregation. The Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. You have dishonored us for 15 years. You have lived a life of sin and rebellion. God has brought us here today to correct your path. You will submit to the authority of this family. Vivian stepped to my right, her face contorted in a bizarre mixture of rage and fake sorrow. How can you be so selfish? She cried out, her voice piercing my ears. Think about your son. Think about Julian. He needs a grandfather. He needs an uncle. He needs the love of a complete family. You are depriving him of his rightful place in our church community. You are destroying his future just because you are too proud to admit you failed. Chloe circled behind me, completing the physical trap. She was practically vibrating with toxic energy. You are exactly the same selfish little brat you were at 18. Chloe spat, her voice filled with venom. You ruined my high school graduation because you were busy throwing up in the bathroom with morning sickness. You ruined the family reputation. And now you are trying to ruin my life again by withholding money that should belong to my husband. You do not deserve this house, Maya. You do not deserve that boy. They all started talking at once, their voices blending into a deafening roar of abuse. Sign the papers, Brad shouted, tapping the pen against the marble. Submit to your father, Marcus roared, slamming his cane down. Stop being so selfish, Vivian wailed. You owe us, Chloe screamed. It was a perfectly choreographed assault. They had used this exact same tactic 15 years ago. I remembered standing in the narrow hallway of my childhood home, my pregnant belly barely showing, shivering in my pajamas. They had surrounded me just like this. Marcus had quoted the exact same scripture to justify his cruelty. Vivian had cried the exact same fake tears to play the victim. Chloe had screamed the exact same insults to make herself feel superior. They had backed me into a corner, shouting over each other until the sheer volume and hatred were supposed to break my spirit. They had demanded I apologize for existing and beg for their forgiveness. And when I was too paralyzed by fear to speak, they dragged me to the front door and threw me out into the freezing snow. They expected the exact same result today. They expected the walls of my own home to close in on me. They wanted to see my hands shake with anxiety. They wanted to see the hot tears well up in my eyes and spill down my cheeks. They wanted me to collapse onto the cold marble floor and beg them to stop hurting me. They firmly believed that if they just yelled loud enough and threatened me aggressively enough, the rich, successful woman standing before them would instantly revert into the terrified, helpless teenager they discarded. The noise in the grand foyer was completely overwhelming. Their vicious threats bounced off the high ceiling, creating a chaotic and disorienting echo. Brad shoved the thick legal petition closer to my chest, demanding my signature. Marcus raised his heavy wooden cane, pointing it directly at my face like a weapon of divine judgment. They were breathing my air, invading my personal space, and trying to crush me beneath the weight of their collective entitlement and rage. But the air in my lungs remained completely steady and calm. My heart rate did not spike in panic. My hands rested entirely relaxed at my sides. I looked at the four angry faces surrounding me in a tight, hostile circle. I looked at the nervous sweat beading on Brad's forehead. I looked at the bulging, angry veins on my father's neck. I looked at the smeared, expensive makeup on my mother's face. I looked at the frantic, bitter desperation burning in my sister's eyes. They were not powerful monsters anymore. They were just pathetic, desperate people begging for a handout. I realized in that exact, crystal-clear moment that they had absolutely no real power over me. The only power they had was completely gone today. The only power they had was completely gone today. I did not scream back at them. I did not raise my hands to defend myself or beg them to lower their voices. Instead, I just let the noise wash over me like water hitting a solid stone wall. And then I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was not a nervous, flinching grimace. It was a slow, terrifying, deeply confident smile that reached all the way to my eyes. It was the smile of a predator who had just locked the cage from the inside. At first, they did not understand. Marcus was mid-sentence bellowing about the wrath of God, but his words began to stumble. His booming pastoral voice cracked as he registered the complete lack of fear on my face. He lowered his heavy wooden cane, staring at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Vivian noticed his hesitation and stopped her theatrical wailing. Her fake tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of genuine unease. Chloe was the last to stop screaming. Her bitter insults trailed off into a heavy, awkward silence when she realized nobody else was yelling anymore. The sudden quiet in the massive grand foyer was deafening. The only sound left was Brad breathing heavily through his nose. His face was still flushed red, but his aggressive posture was failing rapidly. Bullies operate entirely on momentum and fear. When their victim refuses to cower, their entire strategy short-circuits. Brad looked at the custody petition in his hand, and then looked back at my smiling face. He shifted his weight nervously from one foot to the other, suddenly looking very small in his cheap off-the-rack suit. He actually thought I was going to argue the law with him. He thought I would panic and start citing statutes or begging for mercy. He thought I was ignorant enough to believe his hollow threats about biased judges and high-powered corporate attorneys. He did not realize that I spent my entire career swimming in shark-infested legal waters that would swallow a mid-level bankrupt commercial developer like him whole. I did not need to debate him. I did not need to defend my character to a family that had none. They were fighting a ghost from 15 years ago. They had absolutely no idea who was standing in front of them right now. I kept my eyes locked on Brad as I slowly reached into the pocket of my tailored trousers. The sudden movement made them all flinch slightly. Chloe took a half step backward. Vivian clutched the sleeve of Marcus' jacket. They probably expected me to pull out a tissue to wipe away tears, or perhaps bend down to pick up the silver pen Brad had thrown on the floor. Instead, I pulled out my sleek smartphone. The screen illuminated, casting a soft, cool glow against the warm light of the chandelier. I did not break eye contact with my arrogant brother-in-law. I smoothly unlocked the screen and opened my messages. I typed out a single short sentence to the only person in this house whose opinion actually mattered. "Come down." I typed, my thumbs moving swiftly across the glass. "The clowns are performing." I hit send. The faint swoosh sound of the message delivering was the only noise in the room. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and clasped my hands loosely in front of me. I shifted my weight, leaning slightly on one leg, completely relaxed. "Well," Brad demanded, his voice lacking all of its previous authority. "What are you doing, Maya? Who are you texting? Are you calling a lawyer? Because I am telling you right now, no lawyer can save you from this petition." I did not answer him. I just kept smiling. My silence was driving them absolutely insane. They were desperate for a reaction. They needed me to engage with their madness to validate their power. But I gave them absolutely nothing. I let them stand there in their dark mourning clothes, stewing in their own toxic desperation. The silver pen Brad had thrown remained useless on the pristine floor. The seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. The heavy air in the room was suffocating them. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control of the space. "I demand you speak to me, Maya," he barked, but his voice shook with uncertainty. "You will not disrespect this family with your insolence." Still, I said nothing. I just waited. I knew exactly what was about to happen. They thought they had cornered a helpless victim, but they had actually walked blindly into an execution. The suffocating silence in the grand foyer was finally broken by a rhythmic sound echoing from the upper level of the house. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered. The sharp click of leather soles against the polished hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway carried clearly over the sprawling balcony. The four people surrounding me immediately stopped glaring at my face and snapped their heads toward the sweeping mahogany staircase. Brad lowered the custody petition slightly, his brow furrowing in confusion. Marcus tightened his grip on his wooden cane. Vivian and Chloe exchanged nervous glances, completely caught off guard by the sudden interruption. A shadow shifted near the top landing, and then my son stepped into the warm light of the crystal chandelier. Julian did not run down the stairs like a typical 15-year-old boy eager to see visitors. He descended with the measured, graceful pace of a king inspecting his domain. He paused on the middle landing, resting one hand casually on the intricately carved wooden railing. He looked down at the strangers standing in our entryway. He was not wearing baggy jeans or a graphic hoodie. He was dressed in a pristine, tailored navy blue bespoke suit that fit his tall frame perfectly. The fabric was undeniably expensive, catching the light subtly as he moved. His crisp white shirt was immaculate, and his posture was perfectly straight. He exuded a quiet, terrifying authority that mirrored my own. But the most striking thing about Julian was his expression. He looked at the four of them with the exact same cold, analytical eyes I had just been using. There was absolutely no fear in his gaze. There was no childlike curiosity or desperate need for approval. He was looking at them like they were an annoying pest infestation that needed to be exterminated. The transformation of my family was instantaneous and entirely sickening to witness. The vicious, snarling predators who had just threatened to destroy my life vanished into thin air. In their place stood four desperate sycophants who suddenly realized they were standing in the presence of a $15 million walking trust fund. The legal threats and the religious condemnation were immediately forgotten. Greed completely hijacked their nervous systems. Vivian was the first to completely break character. She gasped loudly, slapping both hands against her cheeks in a theatrical display of absolute joy. Her previously dry eyes suddenly welled up with freshly summoned tears. "Oh my goodness," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured maternal love. "Julian. Oh, my sweet, beautiful grandson, look at how incredibly handsome you are. Look at how big you have grown." She did not wait for an invitation. She practically shoved past Marcus and sprinted toward the bottom of the staircase, holding her arms wide open to embrace him. She was fully prepared to trap him in a tight, weeping hug to establish an immediate emotional bond. She expected him to be a confused, fatherless boy, desperate for the love of a grandmother. Julian simply continued his descent, reaching the bottom step just as Vivian lunged forward. He did not say a word. He did not raise a hand defensively. With a smooth, effortless motion, he casually sidestepped her. It was the kind of fluid movement a person makes to avoid stepping in a puddle on the sidewalk. Vivian grabbed empty air and stumbled awkwardly, her heavy designer purse swinging wildly and hitting her in the hip. She caught her balance and spun around, her face flushed with extreme embarrassment. Julian did not even look at her. He casually adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit jacket and walked right past her, stepping into the center of the foyer to stand directly beside me. He slipped his hands into his trouser pockets and surveyed the remaining 3 family members. Marcus tried to recover the fumble. He puffed out his chest and stretched his lips into a wide, booming smile, attempting to radiate grandfatherly warmth. "Well, look at the young man of the house," Marcus boomed, his voice completely devoid of the righteous fury he had used against me moments ago. "It is a profound blessing to finally meet you, Julian. I am your grandfather, Pastor Marcus. We have traveled a long way to see you today, son. We have some very important family business to discuss regarding your bright future." Brad stepped forward, shoving the legal documents into his briefcase and wiping his sweaty palm on his trousers before extending his hand toward my son. "Hey, Julian," Brad said, forcing a cheerful uncle routine. "I am Uncle Brad. It is great to finally put a face to the name. We are here to help you navigate some complex financial matters." Julian ignored the outstretched hand. He looked at them like strangers. Brad awkwardly pulled his hand back, wiping it on his expensive trousers again, his face burning with fresh humiliation. Marcus decided Brad was failing the diplomatic approach and stepped into the middle of the circle. He puffed out his chest, putting on his deepest pastoral voice. He desperately wanted to establish absolute patriarchal dominance over a young boy he incorrectly assumed was craving a father figure. "Listen to me, young man," Marcus said, placing a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. Julian did not flinch, but slowly looked down at the hand resting on his bespoke suit with profound disgust. Marcus missed the cue entirely. "Your mother is a very emotional woman," he continued. "She is stubborn and prone to irrational decisions. But you and we can speak man to man. You are coming into a vast fortune, Julian, left by your great-grandfather. It carries the weight of our family legacy. A teenage boy cannot handle it alone, and a single mother certainly does not understand complex wealth management." Marcus snapped his fingers at Brad. Brad scooped up the silver pen and the stack of guardianship transfer documents. He held them out toward Julian eagerly. "This paperwork allows Uncle Brad to take the financial burden off your shoulders," Marcus continued condescendingly. "Sign this and we handle the complicated adult business. You can go back to being a normal teenager. Buy video games and hang out with friends. We will protect the family wealth and ensure your future is secure. It is the smartest, most responsible decision a young man could make." Julian took the legal documents from Brad. He did not take the pen. He casually flipped through the first few pages. The grand marble foyer was completely dead silent. Vivian held her breath, clasping her hands together in prayer. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. Brad smirked, believing the boy was actually reading the legal terms and preparing to submit to their control. They thought they had successfully bypassed me to manipulate him. Julian stopped flipping the pages. He looked up at Marcus, and then Julian laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a loud, genuinely amused laugh that shattered the tense atmosphere completely. He tossed the documents onto the glass console table with a dismissive thud. "You people are absolutely incredible," Julian said, his voice laced with pure mockery. "You drove here, threatened my mother with a bogus custody lawsuit, and thought you could trick me into signing away my inheritance for video game money." Marcus turned red, his hand falling away from Julian's shoulder. "Trick you!" he bellowed loudly. "We are trying to save you from your mother incompetence. You do not know anything about this trust fund." "I know everything about the trust fund, Marcus," Julian replied, dropping the grandfather title entirely. "I have known about Big Daddy Will since I was 10 years old. My mother did not hide it from me. We sat with his estate lawyers 5 years ago to review the exact stipulations. I know exactly how much liquid cash is sitting in the investment accounts. I know all the real estate assets, and I know the primary condition required a direct male heir to reach his 15th birthday." Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Brad stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. "You knew," Brad stammered, his voice cracking. "Why has your mother not hired a wealth management firm yet? We can still process this transfer today." "Because my mother does not need a wealth management firm," Julian stated, stepping toward Brad. "And you are not taking custody of me or my money. You cannot file a petition and you cannot force my mother to transfer guardianship." "And why exactly is that?" Chloe shrieked, her jealousy boiling over again. "Because she is your mommy and you do not want to leave her big fancy house." "No," Julian answered, his voice dropping to a calm register. "Because I am fully, legally emancipated." The silence that followed was absolute. The four of them stared at my son, completely paralyzed by the weight of his words. "When I turned 15 2 weeks ago, my mother and our highly paid legal team finalized my complete financial emancipation," Julian explained calmly while watching the utter devastation completely wash over their pathetic faces. "I am recognized by the state of Georgia as a legal adult regarding all financial decisions. My mother does not have guardianship over my trust fund, and neither do you. You have no legal standing in this house. The trust fund money is legally mine right now, and your ridiculous custody petition is entirely worthless in any courtroom. You cannot touch a single cent of my inheritance because you are dealing with an emancipated adult." Brad stared at Julian as if the teenager had just spoken in an alien language. Emancipated Brad repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The concept completely shattered his entire legal strategy. He looked down at the expensive legal documents sitting uselessly on the glass console table and then looked back up at my son. "No, that is impossible," Brad argued, shaking his head frantically. "The lawyers who read the will said the money sits in a secure trust account until we finalize the guardianship. You cannot just emancipate yourself and take $15 million. The bank would never allow a teenager to hold that much liquid capital." Julian raised a single perfectly groomed eyebrow. "You really are terrible at your job, Brad," Julian said, his tone dripping with pity. "The bank did not just allow it, they personally facilitated the transfer. The stipulation in Big Daddy Will was very clear. The money unlocks on my 15th birthday. Because I was already legally emancipated by a judge, there was no need for a guardianship holding period. The trust fund was fully unlocked and completely transferred out of the original account exactly 7 days ago." The color completely drained from Brad's face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the warm chandelier light. "Transferred out?" Brad gasped, taking a step forward, his hands trembling. "What do you mean transferred out? Where is the money, Julian? Where is the $15 million? "It is gone," Julian stated plainly. "I moved all of it." "Gone!" Chloe shrieked, pushing past her husband to stand directly in front of my son. "What do you mean it is gone? You cannot just lose $15 million. Where did you put it?" Julian did not flinch at her shrieking. "I did not say I lost it," Julian corrected her coldly. I said it is gone from the trust account. It is no longer sitting in a neat little pile for you to try and steal. Brad began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved up and down as the reality of his total financial ruin crashed down on him. Without that $15 million, his commercial real estate company was completely dead. The banks would foreclose on his properties, the auction would proceed, and his life of luxury would be entirely over. He spun around and pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. His face rapidly shifted from pale to a deep, furious shade of purple. "You stole it!" Brad screamed at me, his voice echoing violently in the grand foyer. "You manipulated him. You manipulated a judge into emancipating him, and then you stole his inheritance." Marcus stepped forward, raising his heavy wooden cane again. "You thief!" Marcus bellowed, his face twisting with righteous anger. "You robbed your own son. You took $15 million from a 15-year-old boy to fund your lavish lifestyle." Vivian joined the chorus of accusations, her fake grandmother routine completely discarded. "I knew you were wicked, Maya, but this is a new low even for you," Vivian yelled. "You used your own child as a pawn to steal our family money. We will call the police right now. We will have you arrested for grand larceny." Brad was practically foaming at the mouth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it on the marble floor. "I am calling the authorities," Brad shouted, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "I am calling the fraud department. You are going to prison, Maya. You cannot just siphon $15 million out of a trust fund and hide it. The financial paper trail will lead directly to you. They will freeze your accounts. They will seize this entire estate, and they will lock you in a federal cell for the rest of your life." He frantically tapped the screen of his phone, trying to dial the numbers. Chloe stood beside him, cheering him on, screaming that they were going to take absolutely everything from me and leave me rotting in a jail cell. They were completely unhinged. They thought they had finally caught me in a massive criminal conspiracy. They thought this was the silver bullet that would destroy me and somehow magically return the money to their greedy hands. I just stood there and watched them unravel. I did not try to stop Brad from making his angry phone call. I did not deny their wild accusations. I simply let them scream themselves hoarse about committing fraud and going to prison while Julian quietly watched them with utter disgust. They were so blinded by their own panic that they failed to realize one crucial detail. If I had actually stolen the money, Julian would certainly not be standing here fiercely defending me. They were so blinded by their own panic that they failed to realize one crucial detail. If I had actually stolen the money, Julian would certainly not be standing here fiercely defending me. I let Brad punch the numbers into his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button. "Go ahead and call them, Brad," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the foyer. "Call the fraud department, call the police, call the federal authorities, and tell them a legally emancipated young man decided to move his own legal inheritance out of a stagnant trust fund. See how fast they laugh and hang up the phone on you." Brad hesitated. His thumb hovered over the screen, but he did not press the button. He looked at Julian and then looked at me. The absolute certainty in my voice finally pierced through his blind rage. Slowly, the reality of the situation began to set in. If Julian was emancipated, then moving the money was not a crime. It was simply a financial transaction that locked Brad out completely. I turned away from my sweating brother-in-law and calmly walked across the pristine marble floor. My heels clicked with a steady rhythmic precision. I moved past my stunned parents and approached the sleek mahogany desk, sitting in the corner of the grand entryway. I reached down and picked up my slim black leather briefcase. It was a custom piece, completely understated, but undeniably expensive. The heavy silver clasps clicked loudly in the silent room as I unfastened them. "What are you doing?" Vivian asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and insatiable curiosity. "What is in that bag, Maya?" I did not answer her immediately. I opened the briefcase and reached inside. My movements were slow and deliberate, designed to stretch the tension in the room until it was nearly unbearable. I pulled out a thick, heavy financial dossier. The document was bound in a black leather cover with several sections heavily redacted with thick black marker. I closed the briefcase and turned back to face the family holding the dossier in my right hand. "You are throwing around words like fraud and theft, Brad," I said, my voice dangerously steady. "You are using terms that belong to common criminals, but you claim to be a sophisticated commercial real estate developer. You should know the fundamental difference between stealing capital and strategically allocating capital." Brad swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the black folder in my hand. "What did you do with the money, Maya?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Where did the $15 million go?" I looked down at Julian, who was standing by my side with a slight smirk playing on his lips. "My son is a very intelligent young man," I explained softly. "He did not want to leave his inheritance sitting in a traditional low-yield index fund. He did not want to hand it over to a failing uncle who buys empty retail spaces in a dying market. Julian has been reading about high-level corporate finance. He wanted to learn about aggressive market acquisitions. He wanted to understand how leverage works in the real world. So instead of just talking about economic theory, we decided to give him a practical lesson. We made a strategic purchase together." Chloe pushed her way forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure disbelief. "You bought something!" she shrieked, her voice echoing sharply. "You took $15 million and you went shopping. What could you possibly buy with that much liquid cash? Did you buy another mansion? Did you buy a yacht? You are completely insane. You threw away our family legacy on a shopping spree." I ignored my sister entirely. Her small mind could only comprehend wealth in terms of luxury items and designer clothes. She had absolutely no concept of actual financial power. I kept my eyes locked directly on Brad. He was the only one in the room who was beginning to understand the terrifying implications of my words. He was a businessman, even if he was a terrible one. He knew that an aggressive market acquisition did not mean buying a boat. It meant buying equity. It meant buying debt. It meant buying leverage. "We did not buy a house, Chloe," I said, my tone dripping with icy condescension. "We bought a portfolio." I stepped toward Brad, holding the heavy black dossier out in front of me. "Brad, let me ask you a very simple business question. What happens when a commercial developer over-leverages his assets and defaults on his massive bank loans?" Brad staggered backward as if I had physically struck him in the chest. His phone slipped from his trembling hand. And hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. The screen shattered instantly, but Brad did not even look down. His pale eyes remained locked on the black dossier in my hand. Marcus and Vivian looked back and forth between us, completely lost. They did not understand the corporate terminology. They only understood church donations and social appearances. Chloe, however, saw her husband completely crumble, and the panic finally began to set into her own features. "What is she talking about?" "Brad?" Chloe demanded, pulling on his sleeve. "What did she buy?" Brad could not speak. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "Since you are completely speechless, Brad, I will explain it to the rest of the family," I said, taking another step forward. "You all came here today, assuming I was just a lucky single mother living off some rich man. You thought I spent the last 15 years crying over the fact that you threw me out. You thought I was helpless. But while Chloe was busy playing house at the local country club and pretending to be a high society wife, I was actually working. I did not find a sugar daddy. I built an empire entirely from the ground up." I opened the black leather dossier and flipped to the first heavily redacted page. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of a massive financial liquidation and debt acquisition firm," I announced, letting the heavy title ring through the foyer. I saw the absolute blank confusion on my parents' faces. They had no idea what that meant. "Allow me to translate that into terms you can easily understand," I continued. "I do not sell houses like your brilliant son-in-law. I buy the debt of failing companies. When arrogant businessmen take out massive loans they cannot repay, the banks eventually get tired of asking for their money. The banks sell those toxic loans to firms like mine for pennies on the dollar. Once I purchase that debt, I become the sole legal creditor. I own the company completely. I strip it down, I seize the physical assets, and I liquidate absolutely everything to make my profit. I am the grim reaper of the corporate world. If my firm knocks on your door, it means your business is already dead, and I am just there to collect the corpse. The color completely drained from Chloe's face as the reality of my career finally penetrated her thick skull. She looked around the massive foyer, suddenly realizing that the crystal chandelier, the imported marble, and the security gates were not paid for by a phantom husband. They were paid for by my own ruthless business acumen. While Brad was busy taking out high-interest loans to build empty retail spaces and leasing expensive cars, he could not afford to project an image of wealth. I was quietly buying up distressed assets across the country. I spent the last decade analyzing market crashes and foreclosures. I learned how to use the exact same capitalist system that you all worship to systematically dismantle failing enterprises. Julian watched every single step of my journey. He sat in my office after school and learned how to read a balance sheet before he learned how to drive a car. So when his $15 million trust fund finally unlocked last week, he did not want to buy sports cars or video games. He wanted to make a high-yield investment. He came to my firm and asked me to find him a distressed asset with a massive upside. He wanted a practical lesson in aggressive corporate takeovers. And as luck would have it, a very interesting debt portfolio had just crossed my desk. I looked directly at Brad, watching the absolute terror completely consume his face. He knew exactly what was coming next. The puzzle pieces had finally locked together in his mind. The mysterious private equity firm that had been aggressively buying up his defaulted bank loans over the past 48 hours was not some faceless corporation in New York. It was the teenage girl he had just threatened to destroy in court. Brad's legs gave out and he collapsed onto his knees, hitting the hard marble floor with a heavy thud. He did not care about his torn trousers or his bruised ego. He looked up at me with tears welling in his eyes. "Please, Maya," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "Tell me you did not do it. Tell me you did not buy my debt." I stared down at him, feeling absolutely no pity for the man who had just tried to steal my son. I tapped the heavy black dossier with my index finger slowly. "We own you, Brad." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of the dossier and threw it onto the glass console table. It landed right next to the useless custody petition Brad had threatened me with earlier. The document featured his commercial real estate company logo at the very top. Bold red letters stamped across the middle read, "Default transferred." "My firm just bought out the entirety of your toxic debt portfolio, Brad," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "We bought out your $8 million shortfall. I am now your primary legal creditor. I am the one who holds the power to foreclose on every single property you claim to own. I did not just take my son's money out of the bank. I used it to buy you. You do not own a company anymore, Brad. You work for me." The absolute silence in the grand foyer was suffocating. Brad remained on his knees, staring blankly at the glass table, as his entire world completely collapsed around him. The legal threats, the unearned arrogance, the racial and class privilege he leaned on all morning had been entirely eviscerated by cold, hard capitalism. He tried to use the system against a black single mother, and that exact same system had just swallowed him whole. Chloe finally broke the silence with a high-pitched, hysterical scream. She lunged forward, dropping to her knees beside her husband, and grabbed his shoulders. "Tell her it is not true, Brad," Chloe shrieked violently, shaking him. "Tell her she is lying. We are rich. We live in a gated community. You cannot let her take our money." Brad did not even look at her. He just stared at the red stamp on the document. "She owns the debt, Chloe," he whispered, his voice completely hollow. "She owns everything." Vivian let out a long, agonizing wail and collapsed against Marcus. My father's face had turned a dangerous shade of purple. He gripped his wooden cane so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He looked at me with a mixture of absolute hatred and profound terror. "You are a monster," Maya Marcus bellowed, his booming voice cracking under the weight of his own panic. "You planned this. You lured us here just to destroy this family. I laughed a sharp, cold sound. I did not lure you anywhere, Marcus, I reminded him, stepping away from Brad and crossing my arms. You drove to my house. You showed up uninvited to threaten me. You brought legal documents to steal my son because you thought I was an easy target. I simply defended my child and my property. Julian walked over and picked up the useless custody petition. He casually tore the thick stack of papers right down the middle and tossed the pieces onto the floor next to Brad, kneeling figure. The state of Georgia takes the welfare of minors very seriously, Julian said, echoing Brad earlier. Threat with perfect, icy precision. I do not think a judge would grant custody to an unemployed bankrupt developer who just lost his entire company, do you? The complete reversal of power was absolute. They had walked into my home expecting to conquer me. They expected to extract millions of dollars from a vulnerable teenager and use the legal system to crush anyone who stood in their way. Instead, they found themselves completely trapped by a woman who had mastered the very game they were trying to play. I looked down at Brad, who was now openly weeping on my marble floor. The cheap cologne he wore could not mask the smell of his utter defeat. "Get up, Brad," I commanded, my voice echoing loudly in the massive space. "Stop crying on my floor. You came here acting like a ruthless businessman. Now stand up and face the consequences of your terrible investments like a man." Brad slowly pushed himself up his expensive suit, now wrinkled and ruined. He looked at me, his eyes red and swollen. "What are you going to do to us?" he asked, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Are you going to foreclose on the properties?" "The commercial properties are already gone, Brad," I stated flatly. "My liquidation team is seizing the empty retail spaces as we speak. Those assets will be sold off to recoup my initial investment. But we both know that your commercial properties were so heavily leveraged that their sale will not cover the full $8 million debt you owe my firm." Brad's face went completely pale again. He knew exactly what that meant. In order to secure those massive commercial loans, he had to put up personal collateral. The bank had required him to guarantee the debt with his own private assets, and now I was the one holding those guarantees. "That is right, Brad." I smiled a slow, terrifying smile. "You pledged personal assets to secure those toxic loans, and as your primary creditor, I am legally entitled to collect on those assets to satisfy the remaining balance." Chloe stopped crying and looked up at me, her eyes wide with sudden, horrific realization. "What personal assets?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at my sister, letting the silence stretch for a moment, before delivering the final fatal blow. "You know exactly what assets, Chloe," I replied softly. "You really should read the documents you sign when you play the perfect little trophy wife." Chloe stared at me in complete and total shock, her mouth opening and closing very rapidly like a pathetic fish suffocating on dry land. She quickly looked down at Brad, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, completely defeated and actively refusing to meet her furious gaze. "Exactly what did you make me sign, Brad?" she immediately demanded, her voice escalating into a wild, hysterical screech that pierced my ears. I did not wait for his pathetic confession. I reached back into the sleek black dossier and pulled out a second sheet of paper, laying it neatly on the glass table next to the first one. When Brad was desperately trying to keep his sinking commercial real estate company afloat, the banks demanded heavy personal guarantees. I explained, my voice echoing in the quiet foyer. He needed a massive influx of cash, and his corporate assets were already entirely maxed out. So he cross-collateralized. He put up the primary residence as collateral for his commercial loans. But because your name is also on the deed, Chloe, he needed your signature to legally mortgage the house. Chloe staggered backward, clutching her chest. "No," she gasped, shaking her head violently. "He told me those were just standard tax documents. He said his accountant needed my signature for a routine corporate filing. I did not read them. I trusted my husband." "Well, that was your first massive mistake," I replied coldly. "Because those routine documents legally transferred the equity of your beautiful 6-bedroom colonial mansion into the hands of his creditors. And since my firm just bought out those creditors, I now hold the primary mortgage on your house. You do not own that beautiful home anymore, Chloe. I do. And because Brad is in severe default, I am legally entitled to initiate foreclosure proceedings immediately. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching scream. She dropped to her knees and began hitting Brad squarely in the chest with her closed fists. You ruined my life, she wailed, hitting him over and over again. You promised me wealth, and you gave away my home. My daughters sleep in that house. Brad just took the blows, his arms hanging limply at his sides, completely broken. Vivian rushed forward, trying to pull Chloe off her husband, screaming that this was a nightmare. I watched them tear each other apart for a moment before turning my gaze to the patriarch of the family. Pastor Marcus had been unusually quiet during this revelation. He stood near the doorway, leaning heavily on his wooden cane, his face pale and glistening with cold sweat. He was watching the destruction of his golden child with absolute horror. But there was something else in his eyes. It was the distinct look of a man who knew he was next on the chopping block. Do not look so surprised, Marcus, I called out, cutting through the sounds of Chloe sobbing. Did you really think I spent millions of dollars acquiring a debt portfolio without auditing every single line item first? Marcus flinched, gripping his cane tighter. I have no part in his foolish business dealings, Marcus bellowed, trying to summon his church voice, but it cracked. I am a man of God. My hands are clean. I laughed loudly. Clean, I repeated, pulling a third document from the black leather folder. Let us discuss the massive $2 million renovation you did on your church sanctuary last year. The stained glass windows, the state-of-the-art sound system, the imported Italian marble for your pulpit. Your congregation was impressed by your ability to secure funding. They thought it was a miracle, but it was not a miracle at all. It was a private loan. Marcus closed his eyes, his chest heaving. Vivian stopped pulling Chloe and spun around to look at her husband. A loan, Vivian asked, her voice trembling. Marcus, what is she talking about? You told the church board that the money came from an anonymous donor. The anonymous donor was your brilliant son-in-law, I answered for him, holding up the document. Brad Company issued a private high-interest loan to the church. Marcus bypassed the board and signed the note himself, using the church property as collateral. He thought Brad would give him favorable terms and keep it a secret. When his company went completely bankrupt, those private notes were bundled into his toxic debt portfolio. The portfolio I just purchased. I slowly tossed the heavy note onto the glass table. So here is the absolute divine truth, Marcus. I do not just own Brad Failing Company. I do not just own Chloe Beautiful House. I own the massive crushing debt on your beloved church, and the monthly payments are severely past due right now. Marcus stumbled backward, his heavy frame hitting the wall. The color completely drained from his face as he stared at the document on the table. The church, his ultimate source of pride and community power, was no longer his sanctuary. It was my asset. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a breathless wheeze escaped his lips. The righteous patriarch who had thrown me into the snow was entirely broken by a single sheet of paper. Suddenly, Brad scrambled to his feet. His sudden movement startled Vivian, who let out a gasp. He pulled his phone out with trembling hands. The screen was severely cracked from when he dropped it earlier, but it still functioned. This is a trick, Brad shouted, his voice cracking with desperate panic. This has to be illegal. You cannot just buy people like this, Maya. There are regulations. There are laws against predatory corporate practices. I am calling my legal team right now. They will file an injunction and have this entire transaction reversed before the end of the day. I gestured toward his phone with my hand. Please go right ahead, Brad, I encouraged him smoothly. Put them on speakerphone. I would love to hear what the most expensive law firm in Atlanta has to say about your situation. Brad frantically tapped the shattered screen and dialed his lead corporate attorney. He pressed the speaker button, and the ringing tone echoed loudly through the grand foyer. Everyone held their breath. On the third ring, a crisp, professional voice answered the line. Richard speaking, the lawyer said. Richard it is. Brad, he yelled into the phone, pacing back and forth across the marble floor. Listen to me very carefully. My estranged sister-in-law just pulled some kind of massive corporate stunt. She runs a debt acquisition firm and she claims she just bought out the entirety of my commercial shortfall from the banks. She is threatening to foreclose on my company, my personal residence, and the church I financed. You need to file an emergency injunction right now. Tell me this is illegal, Richard. Tell me she cannot do this. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched so tightly that Chloe whimpered loudly from the floor. Brad, did she purchase the debt portfolio directly from your primary lenders? Richard finally asked, his tone completely devoid of the panic Brad was projecting. Yes, Brad practically screamed, his chest heaving rapidly. She bought the toxic debt. But she cannot just take my house and my business. It is a hostile takeover. It is entirely predatory. You have to stop her. Another agonizing pause followed. When Richard spoke again, his voice was clinical, cold, and entirely dismissive. Brad, there is absolutely nothing illegal about debt acquisition, he explained flatly. It is a perfectly standard practice in corporate America. The banks wanted to offload your non-performing loans to clear their balance sheets. Her firm purchased the legal right to collect on those debts. If you signed personal guarantees cross-collateralizing your residential property and issuing private loans, then those assets are completely tied to the corporate debt. As your primary creditor, she has the absolute legal right to initiate immediate foreclosure and seize those assets to satisfy the owed balance. Brad stopped pacing instantly. His face went entirely slack. No, Brad whispered, barely able to breathe. You are my highly paid lawyer, Richard. You are supposed to find a legal loophole. You are supposed to protect me from things like this. I cannot protect you from basic contract law, Brad, the lawyer replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. You borrowed money you could not repay, and you legally pledged your personal assets as collateral. The creditor simply changed names. Furthermore, given the complete collapse of your commercial portfolio and your impending personal bankruptcy, I must inform you that our firm requires a massive retainer up front to proceed with any further legal counsel. Since your accounts are likely frozen by your new creditor, I suggest you find a public defender for whatever personal bankruptcies you are about to face immediately. The line went completely dead. The sharp click of the call ending echoed in the silent room. Brad slowly lowered the phone. The high-powered corporate attorney he had bragged about, the legal system he had tried to weaponize against me, had just abandoned him in less than 2 minutes. I looked at him and let out a soft, chilling laugh. You thought your privilege made you untouchable, Brad, I said. You walked into my home today and threatened to use the courts to steal my son. You thought the system belonged to you, but it only cares about financial leverage, and I currently hold all of it. You thought your privilege made you untouchable, Brad, I said. You walked into my home today and threatened to use the courts to steal my son. You thought the system belonged to you, but it only cares about financial leverage, and I currently hold all of it. Brad did not have a single word left to defend himself. He stared at the shattered phone on the floor, his shoulders trembling as quiet sobs finally broke through his chest. The silence in the foyer was heavy, but it did not last long. The shock that had paralyzed my father finally gave way to pure, unadulterated rage. Marcus could not attack me because I held the deed to his sanctuary, so he turned his fury onto the only safe target left in the room. He raised his heavy wooden cane and slammed it violently against the glass console table, causing a loud crack to splinter across the surface. You worthless failure! Marcus roared, his voice echoing like thunder. You arrogant, stupid boy! You told me that loan was entirely private. You promised me the church property would never be at risk. I trusted you with the house of God, and you gambled it away on your pathetic, empty shopping malls. Brad flinched, cowering away from the angry patriarch. I did not mean to. Brad stammered weakly, holding his hands up in a defensive gesture. The market shifted, Marcus. The retail sector completely tanked. I was trying to keep everything afloat until the economy recovered. Do not give me your pathetic business excuses, Marcus spat, his face twisted with absolute disgust. I let you marry my eldest daughter because you convinced us you were a man of means. You paraded around our country club playing the successful white developer. You looked down your nose at our community while using our church as your personal piggy bank. You are nothing but a fraud, Brad, a complete and utter fraud who just destroyed my lifelong ministry. Vivian joined the assault, stepping up beside her husband to glare down at her son-in-law. "We defended you!" Vivian shrieked, her voice raw and hateful. "When people in our congregation questioned Chloe marrying outside our race, we told them you were a provider. We told them you were elite. You have humiliated us. You have stripped us of our dignity in front of the entire city. How are we supposed to show our faces at Sunday service knowing that Maya owns the very pulpit Marcus preaches from?" Chloe had been sitting on the floor weeping into her hands, but her mother's words suddenly made her snap. She scrambled to her feet, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with her own tears. She did not look at Brad. She turned her wild, furious eyes directly onto her parents. "You are worried about your Sunday service!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the air. "I am about to be completely homeless, Vivian. My daughters are going to be thrown out into the street, and you are crying about your social standing at the church." Marcus pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. "Do not raise your voice to your mother," he commanded, but his authority was completely gone. "You chose to marry this loser. I chose him." Chloe laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound that bordered on sheer madness. "I chose him because you forced me to choose him. Do not stand there and pretend this is all my fault. You two spent my entire childhood telling me I had to be the perfect golden child. You told me I had to marry a wealthy man to elevate the family status. When Brad started coming around, you practically threw me at him. You told me his skin color and his bank account were my ticket to high society. You made me believe my only value to this family was looking pretty and securing a rich husband." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest in fake outrage. "We wanted the best for you, Chloe," Vivian cried defensively. "We wanted you to have a beautiful life." "You wanted a trophy," Chloe fired back, stepping closer to her mother. "You wanted a perfect daughter to show off to your wealthy friends so you could pretend we were better than everyone else. And look where it got us. You pushed me into a loveless, superficial marriage with a man who just gave away my house. You sacrificed my happiness for your own disgusting vanity. And you sacrificed Maya because she ruined your perfect little picture." The perfect family completely ripped itself apart in my living room, screaming vicious insults at one another over the shattered glass. I simply stepped back and stood quietly beside Julian. We watched their pathetic cannibalizing destruction in absolute and peaceful cold silence. The violent screaming match between my parents and my sister eventually ran out of oxygen. They realized that shouting at each other was not going to magically rewrite the document sitting on my glass table. Chloe turned her head away from my mother. Her chest was heaving and her expensive makeup was completely smeared across her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked at me, and the reality of her impending homelessness finally broke through her lifelong sense of entitlement. She did not even yell this time. She just collapsed completely. Chloe fell to her hands and knees on the marble floor. She crawled forward, closing the distance between us until she was looking up at me. It was a pathetic sight. The golden child, the perfect daughter, who had spent her entire life looking down her nose at everyone else, was now kneeling at my feet. "Maya, please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "Please do not do this. I am your sister. We share the same blood. You cannot take my house away from me." I looked down at her with absolutely dead eyes. I felt no triumph in this specific moment, only a profound sense of emptiness. The sisterhood she was suddenly trying to invoke had never actually existed. "Blood, Chloe?" I asked, my voice completely flat. "You did not care about our blood when you walked into my home today to help your husband steal my son's inheritance. You only care about blood when your own bank accounts are frozen." Chloe reached out, trying to grab the hem of my trousers, but I took a calculated step backward. She grabbed empty air and let out a loud, agonizing sob. "Think about my girls, Maya," she cried, her voice echoing shrilly. Think about your nieces. They are innocent in all of this. They love their home. They have their own bedrooms and their friends in the neighborhood. If you foreclose on the property, we will have nothing. Where are we supposed to go? Where will my daughters sleep tonight? You cannot throw children out into the street. It is cruel. You are a mother. You understand how fiercely a mother protects her children. Please have mercy on them, even if you hate me. She pressed her face toward the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Vivian watched her favorite daughter grovel and covered her mouth, sobbing quietly, but she did not dare step forward to intervene. She knew I held the deed to the church, and she was too terrified to risk my wrath. Marcus simply looked away, unable to watch the complete humiliation of the daughter he had groomed for high society. I stared at the top of Chloe's head, observing the messy blonde hair she spent hours styling this morning. She was right about one thing. I was a mother, and I understood the fierce instinct to protect a child, but her sudden maternal plea was the ultimate peak of hypocrisy. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to sit in her own desperate panic. When I finally spoke, my voice was as cold as a winter night. I remember a time when someone was about to be thrown out into the street, I said softly but clearly. I remember a freezing December night 15 years ago. I was 18 years old. I was terrified, and I was pregnant with your nephew. I was literally crying on the icy pavement, begging for a place to sleep so my unborn child would not freeze to death. I paused, letting the memory fill the space between us. You were not worried about an innocent child that night, Chloe. You stood on the warm front porch wrapped in your expensive wool coat. You watched Dad throw my cheap suitcase into the snowbank. And you laughed. You actually smiled and laughed at my pain, because you thought my destruction secured your place as the favorite child. Chloe lifted her head, her eyes wide with terror as her past cruelty caught up with her present reality. I did not mean to, she whispered frantically. I was young. I was stupid. You were old enough to know exactly what you were doing, I corrected her sharply. You did not care where my child was going to sleep. You did not care if we survived the winter. So do not kneel on my floor and use your daughters as a shield for your own terrible financial decisions. Your husband gambled away their bedrooms to build empty retail spaces. This is just a simple business transaction. I am simply collecting a legal debt. I looked right through her completely shattered and broken facade as I spoke. My son did not need you then, and my portfolio does not need you now. Chloe wailing dissolved into a pathetic hollow wheeze against the cold marble floor. She realized there was absolutely no mercy left in this house. The well of sisterly affection she tried to tap into had dried up a decade and a half ago. I stepped entirely around her crumpled form, creating a clear physical boundary between her desperation and my peace. I lifted my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp sound echoed through the grand foyer like a gunshot. Almost instantly, the heavy oak doors leading to the west wing of the estate swung open. Two massive men wearing perfectly tailored black suits and discreet earpieces stepped out of the shadows. They did not run or shout. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of highly trained private security. They positioned themselves silently at the edge of the entryway, crossing their arms and waiting for my command. Brad scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his eyes darting frantically toward the large men. Vivian let out a strangled gasp and grabbed Marcus by his jacket sleeve, pulling him toward the front door. The physical presence of my security team finally shattered the last remaining delusion they held. They were not visiting family members negotiating a trust fund. They were hostile intruders inside the fortress of a billionaire, and their time was completely up. I looked at the four of them, taking in their ruined clothes, their smeared makeup, and their absolute total humiliation. I wanted to burn this image into my memory forever. You have all overstayed your welcome, I announced, my voice echoing with final absolute authority. I am officially concluding this business meeting. I want you to listen to me very carefully so there is absolutely no confusion about your immediate future. I pointed directly at Brad, who was struggling to pull a weeping Chloe up from the floor. Monday morning, I stated flatly. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, my legal team will dispatch process servers to your gated community. They will tape a formal notice of foreclosure directly onto the custom mahogany front door of your luxury colonial mansion. They will not be discreet. Your wealthy neighbors will see everything. You have until the end of the month to pack whatever cheap personal belongings my firm does not seize and vacate the premises. Chloe sobbed violently, leaning all of her dead weight against Brad. He could barely hold her up, his own legs shaking under the immense pressure of his total ruin. I shifted my gaze to my father. Marcus was gripping his wooden cane so hard his knuckles looked like they might break through his skin. "And you, Marcus?" I continued, my tone dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. At exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, a second team of process servers will arrive at your church. They will tape a notice of default to the sanctuary doors. If the $2 million balance is not paid in full by Friday, I will send locksmiths to padlock the gates. You will stand in front of your congregation on Sunday and explain exactly how your pride and your greed left them without a place of worship. Marcus closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and rolling down his wrinkled cheek. He had spent his entire life building his religious empire, and I had just dismantled it with a single sheet of paper. I raised my left wrist and casually tapped the face of my watch. "You now have exactly 30 seconds to get off my property." I declared, the finality of the statement ringing in the air. "If any of you are still standing in my foyer, when the clock strikes the minute, my security team will forcefully remove you. I will then personally call the local police and have you all arrested and charged with criminal trespassing. The clock is ticking." Panic instantly overrode their shock. Brad hooked his arms under Chloe's armpits and practically dragged her toward the heavy front doors. She stumbled over her scuffed designer heels, leaving a trail of smeared tears on her expensive dress. Vivian did not even try to help her favorite daughter. She turned and fled, grabbing the brass door handle with trembling hands and throwing the door wide open to the outside world. Marcus hobbled after her, moving faster than he had in years, his wooden cane clattering desperately against the marble floor. None of them looked back. None of them offered an apology or a goodbye. They shuffled out of my house like a herd of frightened, bankrupt animals. They had arrived in a convoy of luxury vehicles, expecting to conquer a helpless single mother. They were leaving entirely broken, humiliated, and stripped of every single asset they possessed. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them with a definitive, thunderous boom. The locking mechanism engaged automatically, sealing the estate. The chaotic noise was instantly replaced by a deep, peaceful silence. The grand foyer felt clean again. I stood in the center of the room and let out a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of 15 years finally lift off my shoulders. Julian stepped up beside me, slipping his hands back into his tailored suit pockets. He looked at the closed doors and then looked up at me with a faint, proud smile. "Well," Julian said, his voice calm and steady, "that was certainly a productive meeting." I looked at my brilliant son, the sole heir to both his great-grandfather legacy and my own corporate empire. "Yes, it was," I agreed softly. "Now let us get back to work." I placed my hand gently on Julian's shoulder, and we turned our backs to the heavy oak doors. We walked together across the grand foyer, our footsteps perfectly synchronized against the cool marble floor. We entered the main living room and stood side by side before the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling front estate. The midday sun poured through the glass, casting a warm golden glow over the immaculate landscaping. Down below, in the sweeping circular driveway, the grand exit of my family was anything but dignified. The luxury vehicles they had arrived in suddenly looked incredibly small and pathetic against the backdrop of my fortress. We watched Brad stumble toward his expensive imported sedan. His hands were shaking so violently that he dropped his keys onto the paved driveway twice before finally managing to unlock the doors. Chloe did not even wait for him to open her door. She yanked the passenger side open and collapsed into the leather seat, burying her face in her hands. In the second car, Marcus and Vivian moved with the slow, agonizing stiffness of people who had just aged 20 years in a single hour. Marcus did not look back at the house. He stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Vivian pressed a tissue to her face, finally shedding genuine tears for the first time in her life. They slowly pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel, retreating back to a life that no longer belonged to them. I watched their cars disappear beyond the heavy iron security gates, and I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash over my entire soul. 15 years ago, I stood outside a window just like this one. I was 18 years old, shivering in the freezing snow, and staring into the warm, brightly lit living room of my childhood home. I watched my parents and my sister eat a hot dinner and laugh together while my fingers went numb and my pregnant belly ached with hunger. I thought my life was completely over that night. I thought the universe had cursed me to be a permanent victim of their righteous cruelty and their toxic, conditional love. Society constantly tells you that you must forgive your abusive family members. People will look you in the eye and say that blood is thicker than water, and that you should always leave a seat open for your relatives at your dinner table. But what do you do when the people who share your blood are the exact same people actively trying to poison your water? What do you do when they lock the doors and refuse to give you a seat at their table? You do not stand in the freezing cold and beg for their scraps. You wipe your tears. You turn your back on their house, and you walk away. You build your own table entirely from scratch. You make it bigger and stronger than theirs ever was. And then you buy the entire building that their pathetic little table sits inside. My family worshipped money and social status above absolutely everything else. They used their religion as a cheap costume to hide their cruelty, and they used their unearned privilege as a weapon to bully anyone who challenged their authority. They truly believed they were untouchable gods in their small, pathetic world. But the beautiful thing about greedy, toxic people is that they are entirely predictable. They will always overextend themselves to maintain a fake illusion of success. Brad built a massive corporate house of cards because he was terrified of looking like a failure. Chloe married a fraud because she was terrified of looking ordinary. Marcus secretly mortgaged his own church sanctuary because he was terrified of losing his grip on power. I did not have to actively destroy them. I simply had to acquire the leverage they so recklessly abandoned and wait for the wind to blow. They built their own traps and they eagerly locked themselves inside. I looked at Julian standing tall and confident beside me. He was not a broken, fatherless boy desperate for a toxic grandfather or a fake uncle. He was a disciplined, educated, and fiercely loyal young man who understood the true value of power and independence. We did not just break a generational curse today. We completely annihilated it. The toxic legacy of Marcus and Vivian ended the exact moment they walked out of my heavy oak doors. Our new legacy begins right here. The game of surviving a toxic family is never won by playing by their rigged rules. It is won by writing your own rulebook and becoming the sole owner of the board. Now I want to hear from all of you listening to this story today. Have you ever had a toxic family member try to use you for their own financial or emotional gain? Did a golden child sibling or an entitled parent try to cross your boundaries and demand things they did not earn? How did you stop them in their tracks? Did you cut them off entirely, or did you serve them a cold, satisfying plate of karma? Drop your stories in the comments below right now because we read every single one of them. If you loved watching this arrogant family get exactly what they deserved, hit that like button to support the channel. Make sure you subscribe and share this video with anyone in your life who needs a reminder that the absolute best revenge is massive, undeniable success. Until next time, keep building your empire, protect your peace, and never let anyone tell you your worth. The most profound takeaway from Maya and Julian's triumph is that you cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, nor should you wait for an invitation to a table where you are only valued for what can be extracted from you. For 15 years, Maya was ostracized and viewed merely as a stain on her family's pristine and hypocritical image. A lesser person might have spent that decade and a half desperately trying to prove their worth, hoping to eventually earn back the love of their parents and sister. Instead, Maya recognized a harsh reality about toxic dynamics. They are inherently rigged, and if you play by their rules, you will always be the loser. Her response was not to argue or beg for her humanity to be seen. Her response was to quietly and ruthlessly master the very systems of power her abusers worshipped. She channeled her trauma into building an undeniable empire. By the time her family arrived with their manufactured grief and empty legal threats, they were bringing paper swords to an impenetrable fortress. Maya did not just protect her son's generational wealth. She fundamentally dismantled the leverage her abusers held by becoming the absolute architect of her own destiny. This teaches us that the ultimate revenge against those who discard you is not explosive anger or endless bitterness. It is absolute and unshakable independence. When you stop seeking validation from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you, you free yourself to build a life they could never even comprehend. You reclaim your narrative the exact moment you decide your worth is not dictated by the people who abandoned you in the cold. Take a hard look at where you are currently seeking approval and redirect that energy into building your own unshakable foundation today.